This is Julia from Beyond Expecting, and this video is about why new mothers and new parents need to be in the company of others just like them. It's something that comes up all the time in my practice as a naturopathic doctor, and I think it's something to really explore and validate, particularly in the year 2021. If you're a new mom, you know this deeply, and if you're not, think back to that time or ask any new mom you know or a new parent you know. Isolation is the biggest challenge that new mothers have. And that doesn't depend on having felt isolated prior to having had a baby. It also doesn't exactly line up with that lack of practical support that so many of us experience, although of course practical support is important too. I think the fact that so many new mothers feel isolated reflects a really deep need that they have to exist in the company, to really be with other new mothers, other parents, other mothers, other grandmothers, people like them, people who get it. And I think that need unearths a truth that is so profound that it's worth focusing on it a little bit. So that's what we're going to do here. And I also want to say that I know that extends beyond mothers to anybody who's solely responsible for a baby or a child. The truth we don't often think about is this. Parenting a small baby is 100% relational. In most of Western life, in contrast to that, we understand that we can automate, we can use machines to do things for us. We use the dishwasher, we use the car. And when we have a baby, we're thrown back into this ancient part of us where our ancient wiring is suddenly activated and we have to depend on that. So what does that look like? Well, babies and especially newborns have very short cycles through a very short list of needs, which of course expands as they grow. The need to eat, the need to eliminate, the need to interact, the need to cry, the need to be held, the need to sleep, the need to be soothed. And then it starts again. Each of these needs must be met in a responsive, nuanced, human way, whether with tender, loving touch, holding, different ways of responding to cues. And this applies whether you're breastfeeding or bottle feeding, whether your baby is in the room with you or in their own room, whether they're in a stroller or in a carrier. It's just the way it is, and it's around the clock. I mean, think about it. Anything we do in modern Western life, any job, any person, anything we do can be turned off, can be scheduled. We can put a boundary up. But mothering is being socially responsive literally 100% of the time, or nearly 100% of the time. And that's let alone being physically responsive as well. Maybe you haven't thought of parenting a newborn as social before. Certainly many of our parents or grandparents haven't. But it is. We know that now. Babies are constantly communicating with us and us with them. I mean, sure, for a couple hundred years there, it was all about schedules and how many minutes per breast and how many bottles per day. But the science of lactation and breastfeeding now tells us to follow cues as often as needed, even if we can't make any sense of them. And brain science and psychology have made us aware of attachment needs. So we interact with our babies. We hold them when they cry. We relate to them as we care for them. And every time we interact, every time we hold them in our arms, coo at them, it forms another bit of their development as a person. And we're so aware of that. So it's all relational all the time. The image that comes up for me is that as adults parenting a newborn in pairs, we're pouring from an empty cup. We're giving socially all the time. And yes, our babies reward us from time to time, but parenting a newborn is very demanding and monotonous. Now imagine for a minute that you zoom out from those couple of parents and a baby or several babies, and you see the other adults around them giving them the same thing that they're getting, giving them back rubs and foot rubs, in-person smiles and hugs, warm, nutritious food, exactly at that moment when it seems that they need it. And imagine that the baby is now older, say 6 or 9 months old. The mother or the parent is getting love, appreciation, acknowledgement, knowing looks. This is how it's supposed to be. This is actually how it's always been until relatively recent in human history. likely around the time of industrialization when families became more nuclear. And this is what it looks like not to have to pour from an empty cup. Sure, we may not have that extended family support or village the way we used to during the postpartum time these days, but after that time, we continue to need that kind of contact, that companionship. We continue to need the knowing looks, the offer for a bit of food or an extra hand exactly at that moment when we look overwhelmed and somebody notices and cares because they know exactly what it's like. And not only that, but their heart has been open to a baby too. Their ancient parental wiring has been activated. So when they hear that incessant baby cry of ours, they don't think, gosh, what's wrong now? They respond with empathy. Their heart is flooded with love. Sometimes we stand to learn from their experience and wisdom as parents, if anything, by watching them skillfully and artfully parent their kids in person, rather than being on the receiving end of their cut and dry advice, which is another reason why it's so great to be together and spend time together in person rather than simply text, email, or phone calls. But what's more, our babies and children need these other adults too. And not just because it helps their parents out or it meets a few of their needs, but because they, like us, are social creatures. They are, I'm sure, aware of this bigger community, this larger circle, this harmony in their space. They are watching us. They are aware of our interactions. Their mother, talking, receiving, interacting, belonging. It gives them a reason to be alive. This goes far beyond the cliche and fact that it takes a village to raise a child. The web of interactions that we have in our communities with the people around us quite literally enlivens and animates our lives so that it doesn't have to feel like we're trying so hard all the time. So becoming a mother, becoming a parent is a journey that opens the door to this deepening of all our relationships. If we heed that call, even if it isn't easy to do that all the time. And if we don't, and we end up slotting all of our parenting life into these modern Western schedules and our individualist identities, well, that's where I see the shadow of isolation growing stronger. And finally, listen, this need for togetherness is a big deal, but it doesn't take going back to that long lost village, that way of life that we've lost, that I definitely sometimes idealize and long for. It takes understanding and intention, opening and reaching out across the divides that separate us, valuing and leaning into the connections we have, even if they're imperfect, if they nourish us and our little ones. So when we feel isolated, we can give that feeling some space, we can grieve that. We can also know where it comes from, and we can honor this profound and beautiful need that we have as mothers, as parents, to be together. And hopefully we can create those moments too.